Philippa Whitford, all the way from, I was going to introduce you by saying here we'd gone away to the South Atlantic or the Indian Ocean or somewhere, and we're on a desert island, but actually we're in Troon and your hometown, and I haven't spoken to you for quite a while. It was back when the elections were taking place for the Parliament.
That seems a lifetime ago.
Last November, and things have changed for you down in Westminster too. You've got new responsibilities, so let's tell everybody about those first.
Well, I'm still the health spokesperson at Westminster, and obviously I've had an incredibly busy 6 or 7 months because of the COVID pandemic. But what I also took on was as European spokesperson. Originally I was shadow Brexit spokesperson, but of course they wound up the Brexit department at the end of January, which has made it very difficult. There isn't a department. It's very difficult to pin a minister down. It's all kind of hidden within the cobweb of Michael Gove and the Cabinet Office. But certainly my responsibility is part of the Brexit campaign, although Brexit of course spreads across so many policy areas. And it did seem a little bit odd, you know, to be health and Brexit. But actually, as we've seen with the UK government failure to engage with European procurement or to take part in the kind of discussions of health ministers through the Centre of Disease Control, actually leaving the EU is going to have a big impact on health. And as we stare down the barrel of the end of this year, the impact on things like medicine supplies, etc., is going to get very acute.
See, we go back a few months before that, and wasn't it still Matt Hancock in that role down in Westminster, and he was buying all the fridges in the world to... I wonder what happened to all the fridges, and were they filled? Where's all this stuff gone?
Well, the thing is, stockpiles were created in 2019 because of the concern about a no-deal Brexit, and obviously that kept moving. So it was going to be last March, then it was last October, then it was the end of the year. And it was the pharmaceutical companies that were told to have a 6-week stockpile of all their medication, and for insulin a 3-month stockpile, because the UK doesn't produce insulin. All of the insulin is imported from the EU, and that's a real concern. And it does have to be stored in fridges, hence his boast. Now, the problem is the government have written to the pharmaceutical industry again recently, saying that they need to prepare stockpiles for the end of transition, because I think it's inevitable that there will be delays around the Dover-Calais crossing, which is where most of the medicines come over. And the problem is the response has been, well, actually, that's going to be quite difficult this year, because there are world shortages of both medical supplies, medical devices, purely because of COVID. So trying to recreate these stockpiles in the middle of a pandemic is not going to be easy. And as I've been raising since 2016, you have things like radioisotopes that we use in scans that literally decay over a matter of 2.5 days. You can't stockpile them. You have to be able to bring them in, and you have to be able to bring them in quickly. So a lot of what we were facing, talking about no-deal preparation in 2019, is actually coming round again.
Yeah. Now we've got, obviously, when we arranged to do this, it was a couple of weeks back, and of course the things that we talked about, we were going to talk about today have all changed really, because, and of course this video will stay around for quite a while, so it needs to sort of stretch and streak, but there's such a huge issue now, which is regarding the things you've just spoken of with the Brexit and this enormous piece of information we had that the government are prepared to break the law. Now, as a normal kind of citizen, I think that this is a tremendously awful thing to tell your citizens, that if you're going to break the law, why shouldn't they? Well, it's the bottom line, isn't it? And then what is the signature of the UK government worth anywhere?
I would say to my honourable friend that yes, this does break international law in a very specific and limited way. We are taking the power to disapply the EU law concept of direct effect required by Article 4 in a certain very tightly defined circumstances. And there are clear precedents for the UK and indeed other countries needing to consider their international obligations as circumstances change. And I would say to honourable members here, many of whom would have been in this House when we passed the Finance Act in 2013, which contains an example of treaty override. It contains provisions that expressly disapply international tax treaties to the extent that these conflict with the general anti-abuse rule. And I would say to my honourable friend, we are determined to ensure we are delivering on the agreement we have in the protocol, and our leading priority is to do that through the negotiations and through the joint committee work. The clauses that will be in the bill tomorrow are specifically there for, should that fail, ensuring that we're able to deliver on our commitments to the people of Northern Ireland. I would say to my honourable friend that yes, this does break international law. That yes, this does break international law. That yes, this does break international law.
So let's talk about this and your opinion, your view upon the idea that you're sitting in the Parliament, or you were on the television in the Parliament, whatever it was that you were that day, and the gentleman at the dispatch box says, well, of course we're prepared to break the law in a limited kind of way. Well, I mean, you can't be. It's like speeding, isn't it? You know, if you go at 40 and at 30, it's limited from the fact that it's not 50, but you're still speeding. So
absolutely. And if you watch that, I mean, that was in Northern Ireland questions, and it was Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and he was asked, it was in response to a question from a Conservative MP who is a lawyer himself. And if you watch that little clip, you will see literally his eyebrows disappear over the top of his head. He can't believe what he's hearing, because as the questions went on, he asked the question to give the minister the opportunity to clarify. Of course we're not going to break international law. So for the Secretary of State to turn around, well, we're going to break international law, but only in a very precise and specific way. And if you look at the Vienna Convention on international treaties, Article 26 is you have to honour the treaties. Article 27 is you cannot use domestic law as an excuse for undermining or breaking an international treaty. So, I mean, the international position is quite clear. And I think from some of the comments from Europe, and because my husband's German, you know, we see the German media. I think at the beginning of the week, both within the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen and others, they thought this was posturing. You know, this is ramping up tension before this week of negotiations. Whereas now it's clearer that it's a degree of gunboat diplomacy, and simply the EU will not respond to that. You know, it was the Prime Minister who came up with this option, which was in essence to go back to the EU's very original proposal, which was to put Northern Ireland in, give them special treatment. He came up with it, he came back, I've got a great deal, they rammed it through Parliament. We demanded more time to read it, to study it, debate it. You don't need that. And now he's acting surprised, as if he didn't even read his own deal, which he campaigned in the election for. So, you know, there's no question that they know what they signed, or else they're complete idiots. And there's no question that what they're talking about undermines that. And there's two halves to this bill. It impacts on all three devolved nations and will hollow out devolution as it is now. And both the First Minister of Wales and obviously our First Minister in Scotland have talked about how utterly unacceptable that is. Because what is envisaged is the UK government wants to have the power to start directly spending and therefore setting policy in devolved areas, completely cutting out Holyrood, so they would fund money to a local council, but only to do what their projects and priorities are. So this cuts out the option of our democratic parliament saying, well, actually our needs in Scotland are a wee bit different, we're going to do it this way. So you're completely facing a power grab, you're completely facing an undermining of devolution. And then when you take this action to extreme, what you have in particular is this second aspect of it, which undermines what was agreed in Northern Ireland. And the problem is that was very difficult to achieve. And from the point of view of the EU, who frankly are fed up to the back teeth with the amount of time Brexit has taken, And now the thing they thought they had finally nailed down last year, the UK is going, no, actually, we can't be bound by any treaty because we are sovereign. Every single treaty means you agree to do something and not do something with another partner. So in that sense, you've given away a little bit of your sovereignty. You can't just behave as you like because you agreed to do something different. So if they're putting this forward as a principle that Westminster can never be bound by an international treaty and that they will go back on it if they so choose, who on earth is going to agree anything with us? Whether it's a trade deal or a peace treaty, which is what the Good Friday Agreement was. We had Tory MPs talking about, oh, the Good Friday Agreement is past its sell-by date. You know, I'm from Belfast. I know what people suffered. I know how important the Good Friday Agreement is. And they're trying to claim that what they're doing is to protect it. No, they're undermining it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am joined here today by the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr Nicola Steedman, who will say a few words shortly. I will start, though, with the usual run-through of the daily statistics.
Well, Nicola Sturgeon is our First Minister, and she makes these broadcasts as our First Minister. Nothing to do with the fact that she's SNP. She has been absolutely rigorous in not responding to questions that are about something else, not responding in a way that criticises the decisions of other governments. She has carefully avoided bringing party politics into this. So she's not there as the leader of the SNP, she's there purely as our First Minister. And the World Health Organization, if you look at their 6 key principles for management of an epidemic, direct, clear communication with the public is absolutely front and central. And our First Minister has done that. And that's why I think you even have people from south of the border who actually have been watching her briefings because the advice is clear and understandable. And she has put in such a shift in the last 7 months doing these. And I know lots of people who watch them. And I think if you were looking at BBC Scotland, because the full session is shown on the BBC Scotland channel, it's probably one of their higher viewing figures programmes. Now, I can accept that they might reduce what they show on BBC One, because BBC Scotland is widely available now. But the idea that they would only show these if they have what's called editorial merit. So are they planning to record them and then they will decide whether it's an important one or a not important one? Will it be medical experts who will decide? The great thing about these is we've been able to hear it directly from the First Minister. She's been there to be challenged either by journalists in a press briefing or in Holyrood by other politicians in FMQs. And we could hear all of that, not filtered, not reinterpreted by anyone, not a slant put on it. And I think that is critical. And to do that now, when cases are rising and we're heading into the autumn and winter, is crazy. So when there were the original complaints from George Fawkes and Jackie Bailey and all the usual suspects, the BBC response, which is publicly available, was very clear. This is important. We are in a pandemic and, you know, this is our duty. Well, they are still a public service broadcaster. And when have they ever been more important than in the middle of the worst pandemic any of us have experienced in our lifetimes? So I think it is outrageous and it's unjustifiable.
There's kind of a little postscript to that. I don't know if you're aware, but I'm very aware because Thursday used to be a good day in the car for me. If I was going off to do what I have to do normally, and I could put on the radio, they would put the full First Minister's questions on the normal full radio, so you could hear it on the FM. It's now been relegated to the medium wave, which is almost impossible in the car. And okay, you can pick it up later on the internet and all these things, but you see the problem with putting it on the internet is that a lot of people can't cope with the internet, and it's a lot of people. My neighbours are generally my age and older, And I'm amazed that they have actually given great praise. Well, Nicola Sturgeon's doing a good job.
But that's been recognised by people, regardless of whether they're SNP supporters or support our version of what is the best future for Scotland. What they can see is the First Minister has worked literally tirelessly since this began. She has been there on that podium herself, not an ever-changing cast. She has used straightforward language and she has explained all the advice at every stage. There is no handbook on COVID.
No.
Every government in the world has had to feel their way forward. There are things we know now we didn't know then. There's things that we've learnt because of research. There's things we've learned because of mistakes, and you have to accept that. But she has been absolutely upfront, and the key thing is that the advice has been clear and people have understood it. You know, our facts advice in Scotland, face coverings, avoid crowds, clean hands and surfaces, 2 metres, self-isolate if you've got symptoms. It's very clear. Lots of people in England were struggling to understand what the guidance was because it was changing, and they abandoned their press conferences. And frankly, even when they had them, they were not always terribly clear. So these have been central to the campaign in Scotland against COVID, to understanding it, getting the public to understand it, and getting the chance to convince people of the need to follow these rules. If we don't want to be stuck back in our houses again in winter, we need to follow the advice. That means you have to have the chance to convince people of its importance. And the First Minister has been doing that. So for the key public service broadcaster in Scotland, BBC Scotland, to talk about editing that out, censoring it away, is absolutely outrageous and is frankly dangerous.
The future of our world with the COVID. I mean, none of us can predict, because none of us, in March, the 11th was the last day I properly worked. I mean, I've been working like in my home ever since, trying to make sense of all this stuff, but I don't know. See, I don't understand I only understand people, really, and I don't understand them awfully well sometimes. I don't think I understand myself, but I do have a grip on how to make folk respond and how to make them laugh a bit and how to make them enjoy themselves. And I can look at the audience, I can see the crowd, I can understand it, and I can put to their direction what they need. Without that, my whole existence disappears, really, because that's what I've spent my whole life doing. Now, there's other people who do different things. What are we going to do? I mean, the vaccine doesn't seem to be that close. I mean, the Zeneca folk had to back off the other day. I mean, what is your take about where we go from here? I mean, have you got any? I mean, I don't know. Can you predict? No, probably not. But what can you say about it?
Well, obviously, COVID is still with us, and COVID is going to be with us for the next several years. You know, the pandemic on a global basis is still just getting going. So the idea that because we've been through the first peak in the UK, it's all over and we can just go back to business as usual is nonsense. And I think that's what's disappointing about some of the decisions in Westminster, is it's been pushing people back into offices, trying to say, it's all over, forget about it now, go back to normal. Well, we can't. We actually have to learn to live with it. And a vaccine, I mean, vaccines normally take 4 or 5 years to produce. And I think it is critical that no shortcuts are taken. I'm chair of the all-party group on vaccines at Westminster. And, you know, the good the vaccines have done in the world is incredible. But we do have a degree of scepticism. We have obviously out-and-out anti-vaccine campaigners. And if you allow any feeling that shortcuts are being taken and safety steps are being missed out, then not only would you have people not taking this vaccine, but you would actually undermine vaccines in general. And actually the deaths and disablement from things like polio coming back up, blindness or encephalitis from measles, death of children by measles, would be enormous. It would be enormous. And therefore, it is absolutely critical that we allow the time for the vaccines to be put through their paces. Now, one of the things I find disappointing is that as well as the kind of vaccine nationalism we're seeing around purchasing vaccines, we're also seeing it in research. Whereas what the world should be doing through WHO is looking at the kind of 100 or so possible vaccine candidates and then working out what are the 10 or 12 best, and then let's get everyone working on them. Because the person who actually has the very best vaccine candidate could be from some tiny university laboratory in the middle of Africa without the wherewithal to actually develop it up. So, you know, we really do need a multilateral approach to this, and unfortunately we still don't have that. So the vaccine is certainly not going to be here before next winter at the absolute earliest, and even that is an accelerated timescale. So to me, right now, we actually have to learn how do we get as close to normal as we can, and what are the things that we need to do to allow that. And some of that is face coverings are very important. You know, yes, the research wasn't there at the beginning of this, but a lot of research has been done that's shown they actually protect the wearer as well as everyone else, but they particularly protect everyone else from the wearer. So they reduce the droplet spread of COVID, keeping apart, keeping our hands clean, ventilation, you know, perspex screening. We need to look at all of these things. If that allows us to get back into pubs, get back into restaurants, get back into venues, because they're the most difficult situations to be in. But the idea that people are rejecting some of these simple measures, and therefore we're seeing cases going up, we have people who are not following the rules. We obviously had the hospitality outbreak in Aberdeen, it's more house party driven in Glasgow. We really need people to realise we have to make little changes to allow us to get big gains. And I find it staggering that people have forgotten the death numbers that were being announced during April and May, that people are not thinking of those who've lost a loved one, and that people are forgetting that we were literally all stuck in our houses for, you know, for a couple of months. So, you know, let's not go back there. Let's follow this. But it isn't gone. It is exactly here. And it is incredibly infectious. You know, SARS-1, which happened in 2002, and many of us remember the horrific video and narratives that were coming from Asia, is the thing about that was it had a much higher death rate. It killed about 1 in 10. But you only became infectious after you had symptoms. So by then you were already quite unwell, you were in bed, everyone could see what you had, they were all being careful. What is lethal about COVID that we're dealing with is you become infectious about 2 days before you have symptoms. So you're quite innocent, you have no idea that you are spreading it, either to your loved ones or your neighbours. And that's why we have to all follow these rules all the time, because we simply don't know that we're carrying it. And the death rate is much less, but that greater ability to infect people means that the number of deaths is enormous. I mean, about 8,000 people died from SARS-CoV-1. On a worldwide basis, we are not far from 1 million at the moment. So the whole scale of this is something that thankfully we haven't met in our lifetimes. So we have to accept it needs to be an extraordinary response. And we need to accept that. You can't just go, it's over, and now we go back to normal. But equally, we have learnt to do things differently. There's been lots of things that people were maybe talking about for years and didn't get around to. And suddenly they happened within weeks. Within councils, within the health service, within businesses. You know, home working has gone up from 12 to 44%. It is commuter travel that is the biggest generator of CO2. So we actually have a chance to increase productivity, as has been found, decrease sickness absence, as has been found, decrease our pollution, and decrease our contribution to climate change. And while the UK government are going, no, get back into your offices so you buy a sandwich for lunch, actual businesses are going, we're going to change the way we work. So there's all sorts of potential for good that comes out of this. But if we don't want to end up back in our houses, we have to follow the rules. And the problem is we're going to be facing now the economic fallout of COVID, particularly as the Chancellor takes away the job retention scheme, the furlough. We are now going to be facing not just Brexit at the end of this year, but a huge number of redundancies. And the problem with that is we're going to have to rebuild. So our economy, our society and our personal lives have all been brought to a shuddering halt. And my argument would be, let's not build back to what we had before, where we were just eating the planet. Let's actually build forwards. Let's look at how we can live more sustainably, how we can decrease the inequalities in our society. So it's like when you bring anything to a stop, and therefore you're off your hamster wheel. You have the chance to think about, what is it we want to build back? It's not going to return for nothing. It will need huge investment and effort. So let's choose what it is we want to go forward to and look at kind of moving forward to an economy and a society that can live with the planet, where we can live with each other, where we can sustain ourselves. Because that's the opportunity that we have at the moment. And that requires huge imagination, huge willingness and energy. And it will require the funding to do it. And that's why I utterly believe there's no possibility of Scotland getting this as part of the UK. They want to go back to business as usual. The elite have made money out of the COVID pandemic. They will make money out of the hard Brexit that's coming at the end of the year. And if we're strapped onto that, there's no chance of us doing something differently, particularly not when our Parliament is being unravelled. The Parliament that gives us the baby box and early learning and free tuition and free personal care. These are things, many of them not available elsewhere in the UK, that people value, whether they support independence or not at the moment. They value what our Parliament has given to them. And I absolutely believe if we don't go forwards so that Scotland is utterly in the hands of the people of Scotland, then we're going to be going backwards. We're going to be heading back to what we experienced in the 80s, where Mrs. Thatcher was able to just tear through Scotland and lay down her destructive policies. And this time it will be Boris Johnson in the driving seat.
So independence is what we need.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And sign up for the app, because the Protect app doesn't tell anybody who you are, where you are. It just gives you a message if you've been near to somebody else who's got it.
I've already signed up to the app. The app is a small contributor. Our public health-based system is reaching 98% of contacts in Scotland. So we've built it on traditional contact tracing. But where the app will be really helpful is if you're on a train, if you're in public transport, if you're in a space where you don't know the contacts you're near, then it will be able to anonymously send a signal. So if you test positive, you put the code in your phone and it will tell all the other phones you were close to that they've been close to someone. They won't get your details aren't stored anywhere at all. And it means Scotland, Northern Ireland and Ireland all have basically the same app, and indeed it'll be compatible with the apps used in Europe, such as in Germany. So this will work even if you're travelling elsewhere. So it doesn't replace our public health system, which is doing a fantastic job in test and protect, but the Protect app will add that little extra bit of ease when you've been meeting someone that you don't know.
Philippa, thank you.
There's a new way for all of us to work together to stop coronavirus spreading again, and it only takes a few minutes to do. NHS Scotland's free Protect Scotland app will automatically alert you if you have been in close contact with another app user who has tested positive. And if you test positive, the app can quickly alert those you've had close contact with. The app is private and anonymous, and by downloading it, we can all help protect ourselves, our families, and Scotland against coronavirus. Download the free app today at protect.scot.